It's always fun going into the music library and rediscovering great music and great artists that maybe you might have forgotten about. Now, this next artist that we're going to talk about in this episode is a rocker, but he's always contended he's a blues player. And we're going to talk about Steve Miller and the Steve Miller Band. What an amazing career this rocker blues player has had. You ready to go on the trip? All right then, let's drop the needle. A very young Steve Miller formed a blues band in Chicago, and they actually cut a single called Mother's Song. But Steve decided that he would move to San Francisco. So once he gets out on the West Coast, he decides to call the band the Steve Miller Blues Band, and he gets a contract with Capitol Records. The band consisted of Steve Miller on guitar and lead vocals, Lonnie Turner on bass, Tim Davis on drums, and Jim Peterman on the organ. Shortly thereafter, Boz Scaggs joins and plays guitar, and the new band is featured at the Monterey Pop Festival. In early 1968, the band travels to England and record their first album, which is called Children of the Future, produced by Glenn Johns. And interestingly enough, George Martin, the Beatles producer, says, Steve Miller Blues Band, you need to change the name. Just make it the Steve Miller Band. It'll be more accessible to more people and you'll have better success. So that's what they did. Side 1 plays as one continuous track and includes songs like Children of the Future, Pushed Me to It, The Beauty of Time Is That It Is Snowing, Psychedelic BB. The album is best described as a marriage between psychedelia and blues. Most of the songs are written by Steve Miller, but Boz Scaggs has a couple on side 2. Boz's songs are Baby's Calling Me Home and Stepping Stone. And then side 2 also contains covers of Fannie Mae and Key to the Highway. It sells modestly and it reaches 134 on the charts. They follow this album up quickly with their second album called Sailor, and it does much better in the charts, reaching number 24, fueled by 2 hits, Living in the USA and Gangster of Love. But I also really like Quicksilver Girl and Dime a Dance Romance. Shortly after the album is released, Boz Scaggs leaves the band to pursue what becomes a very successful solo career. But that doesn't stop Steve Miller. No, in 1969 he records his third album, Brave New World, and it climbs to number 22 on the charts. I like Brave New World, Celebration Song, Cow Cow, Space Cowboy, and My Dark Hour. Part of this album was recorded in London, and as a result, Paul McCartney is on 2 of the tracks. He sings, plays guitar, and drums and bass on the song My Dark Hour. And he also does backing vocals on Celebration Song. That same year, Steve Miller records another album called Your Saving Grace, but it doesn't do quite as well. It only reaches number 38 on the charts. I like Little Girl, Baby's House, Motherless Children, and of course, Your Saving Grace. In 1970, he follows up with his 5th album, which is called Number 5. This is the last album that the original drummer, Tim Davis, will be on, and he wrote one of the songs called Hot Chili. I like Good Morning, I Love You, Going to the Country, Industrial Military Complex Hex, and Never Kill Another Man. This album reaches number 23. So you can see a pattern here. His albums are all coming in around somewhere in the low 20s on the charts. But then, unfortunately, Steve Miller is involved in an automobile accident, and of course he can't make any music, so he can't go into the studio, and Capitol is desperate for another Steve Miller album. So they decide to take some live recordings and some studio outtakes and release an album called Rock Love. Side 1 has the live tracks, The Gangster Is Back, Blues Without Blame, and Love Shock. Side 2 has the studio tracks Let Me Serve You, Rock Love, Harbor Lights, and Deliverance. And even though Steve Miller's previous albums were tracking right in there in the charts around the 20s, this album is a commercial failure. And his luck does not improve with his next album, released in 1972, called Recall the Beginning, A Journey from Eden. It does not sell, but I like Inner Maurice, High on You Mama, Somebody Somewhere Help Me, and Journey from Eden. Capitol is desperate for a hit album, so they take songs from his previous album and release an album called Anthology, which is like a greatest hits album, and it sells. By 1973, times are definitely changing, and Steve decides, I'm going to leave the psychedelia phase behind and go to a much more harder stadium rock. And he releases the album called The Joker. It's a smash hit, reaching #1 on the charts. Besides the massive hit The Joker, I like Sugar Babe, The Loving Cup, and Evil and Something to Believe in. Steve continues to tour, and I saw him many times, both in the early days and during these tours. And 3 years later, he releases his follow-up album, Fly Like an Eagle. And again, it's a big hit. It contains Fly Like an Eagle, Take the Money and Run, and Rockin' Me, all of which were hits. By this point, Steve Miller is a hit-making machine, and he follows this album up with his next album, Book of Dreams, which has 3 hits on it as well. They are Jet Airliner, Jungle Love, and Swingtown. And meanwhile, he continues to tour to sell out crowds. In 1981, he releases Circle of Love. But this album doesn't do very well. There are only 5 cuts on the record. Macho City is 18.5 minutes long, and it takes up all of side 2. But undeterred, in 1982, he strikes gold again with his next album, Abracadabra. Besides the title track, it also contains the hits Cool Magic, Keeps Me Wondering Why, and Give It Up. Between 1984 and 2001, Steve Miller continued to release records, but none of them captured the magic of his previous years. In 1984, we get Italian X-Rays. 1986, Living in the 20th Century. In 1988, he decides to be a blues guy again and releases Born to be Blue. 1993, Wide River. 2010, Bingo. And his last album to date is Let Your Hair Down, which was released in 2011. But Steve Miller has always been a bit of a contrarian, and he got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But he was apparently not happy that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame decided to induct him as a solo artist. He thought every person who had played in the Steve Miller Band should have also been inducted. So for his acceptance speech, this is what he said. When they told me I was inducted, they said, you have 2 tickets, one for your wife and one for yourself. You want another one? It's $10,000. Sorry, that's the way it goes. Then I said, what about my band? What about their wives? Apparently at this point, somebody from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame stood up to try to usher him off the stage. But he wasn't done yet. Here's what he said. No, we're not going to wrap this up. I'm going to wrap you up. You go sit down over there and learn something. Then Steve held 2 fingers very close together and said, this is how close this whole show came to not happening because of how the artists are being treated. And then he left the stage. Well, he certainly made his feelings known, but there's no arguing that the Steve Miller Band had a tremendous 14-year run from their debut in 1968 up through Abracadabra. And Steve is still active today. He has a very good website that you should check out, and here's the link for that. In the meantime, if you want some good rockin', take a listen to Jet Airliner or Jungle Love and rock out. And thanks for watching. Till next time, keep it rocking. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.